used in a number of different ways here. One is a self that is unchanging, unitary and independent, meaning a person that's not changing, a single thing, and completely independent of everything else. That is not something we would instinctively have, that false sense of me, but it comes up in the Buddhist text because at the time of the Buddha there was a number of traditions who said this is how the self exists. So the Buddha refuted that, but this would only be a sense of self you would come to through some wrong intellectual way of thinking. So this one, of course, doesn't exist, but it doesn't really cause us much problem because it's not really thing that we have instinctively. But the next one we do. And that is the sense of an autonomous self. We do instinctively have this false sense of me. We have a sense that somewhere here is a me that's more than just the body and the mind, something extra on top of the body and the mind, but it's here somewhere. And we have this in our language. We often say, I have a body, I have a mind, as if there's three things here. There's a me, a body, and a mind. Is there three things here? Is there a me that is distinct from the body and the mind? That is something in addition to the body and the mind? No. Again, intellectually we may correctly understand that's not the case, but instinctively we have that sense. Instinctively we have a sense there's a me here that seems to be something more than the body and the mind, this autonomous me. That, of course, doesn't exist, but that is we're instinctively grasping to such a me, and that's causing a lot of mental afflictions and suffering. And in the Theravada Buddhist traditions, this is the Vipassana practice that we need to engage in to achieve nirvana. We can realize there's no such self, we can achieve nirvana. Here in the Mahayana, they say there's actually a deeper level of false grasping to me. And that's the one we're addressing here in the text in terms of emptiness. That there is an inherently existing me here, a me that exists from its own side. There's a me here and a world there, independent. And so this is the grasping to self that we are directly addressing in this text here. So of course this one doesn't exist either.
What's the difference between 3 and 4?
The 3 and the 4. 3 is... The 3 means there's a self that's something more than the body and the mind. This is the self is the body and the mind. This one is a sense there's something, the self is something a little bit extra, more, on top of. Where this is, the self is there, is the body and the mind. So, yeah, just one second. So therefore, no self as self really in these 4 distortions is sort of really pointing here. And the 4th one we see things which are dependent as independent. And so this is the one that is really pointing to here. And this we overcome through the Vipassana practice of emptiness, of course. And this is what we are mainly focusing on here. So here in the text, when we come up now, it'll talk about selflessness, which is just another word for no self. Selflessness there in the text means this. And so this means, so selflessness and emptiness then actually mean the same thing. We'll see that in a little bit in the text, but there's a question over here.
Yeah, if we really experience, understand the four distortions, why is the self, they speak about it, besides, if we understand all these four, don't we understand that the self also is, it has the three impermanence and nothing is, the four distortions is like nothing has its, all the four that are for the self are also for everything. Nothing exists the way we see it, or is permanent, or is, it has a self-identity. Any object. So if we understand all these three rules, don't we understand about the self? Why they emphasize everything again about the self? Do you understand that?
Because here, of course, with all of these, we're applying to everything. I mean, here we're realizing with respect to everything, and here the same. But here, the point is that you initially focus on the person. And when you realize that with respect to the person, you realize it with respect to everything else. Similarly here, as we're going to see in the text, in the second presentation, we're still in the first, in the second one, what's recommended here with this, of course, this is applying to everything, but we start with the person. We realize there's no inherently existent self, and by realizing that, we realize the same for everything. Because it's generally recommended we start with me, the person, because it's most familiar and easy to work with than other things. That's why. Yeah.
So when I learned it, it was called the 3 or 4 marks of existence.
Yeah, the 3 marks of existence plus emptiness. Yeah. Yes.
And also, would it be right to say that all of those are actually wrong view?
Yeah, they're all wrong view. Distortions. That's what the word distortion means. Wrong view.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's what it means. Okay. So let's go to the text then. So it says here that if we want to overcome samsara and achieve nirvana, then here in Mahamudra practice, in Mahayana, we have to realize the ultimate nature of one's own mind as it is. And the ultimate nature, of course, is that the mind does not inherently exist. We have to realize this emptiness of the mind. And now comes 3 quotes from various Mahamudra traditions within the Kagyu tradition on how we can come to realize the ultimate nature of the mind. So let's have a look at those to get a little bit of a flavour. So it says, ways to meditate by cutting through a basis or root to the mind. So when it says to cut through a basis or root to the mind, it means to cut through grasping onto the mind as inherently existent. The first one says, some state, within a state of meditative equipoise, one investigates whether one's own mind is established as being inside or outside, or as something that arises, abides and ceases. When one sees that it is not established in any of these ways, then one has cut through a basis or root to mind. One has been introduced to the nature of the mind, and the goal of Mahamudra is attained. And here is quoting a Doha, one of these spiritual songs of realization that we briefly mentioned earlier. When the mind and all appearances are sought, they are not found, nor is there a searcher anywhere. Since that non-existence neither arises nor ceases in the past, present or future, it cannot transform into something else. It is the mode of abiding of natural great bliss, thus all appearances are dharmakaya. So when we see this word dharmakaya here, this is referring to this very subtle mind of an enlightened being. The dharmakaya is the enlightened mind, particularly this very subtle level of mind. Second one says, others state, when one searches for the mind within the parts of one's own body, from the crown of the head to the soles of the feet, when one sees that it is not established as being any of those parts, that it is not established in any way as a physical entity having a shape, colour or so forth, then one sees the nature of the mind. This is because, as said by Shan Rinpoche, so Shan Rinpoche is one of the great masters in the Kagyu Mahamudra lineage. The nature of one's own mind is the seed of all. From the very beginning, it is not different from the minds of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. It appears as Dharmakaya. It is not matter, and it is clear by nature. Not established as a functioning thing, and it has no colour or size. And then the third quote here is, still others state, without dwelling in the past or anticipating the future, rests serenely in a state of present awareness, fresh and uncontrived. In this way, the nature of the mind will be nakedly and directly seen. At that time, one has cut through a basis or root to the mind and has been introduced to the nature of the mind. Because as said by Saraha, so again quoting from this great Indian Mahasiddha Saraha, rest in a fresh, uncontrived and relaxed manner. And again a quote from this Mahasiddha Langripa Padma Dorje, who's also from one of the Kagyu lineages of Mahamudra. He says, when resting in an uncontrived and fresh manner, realization dawns. When sustaining this like the flow of a river, it will dawn even more fully. You, the yogi, thoroughly abandon all signs of fixation and be constantly in meditative equipoise. So what we see here is that in this sort of oral Mahamudra tradition, when we talk about nature of the mind practice, it's a very direct approach in terms of coming to realise the nature of the mind, looking for the mind. Is it located somewhere? Does it have a colour? Does it have a shape? Is it inside the body, outside the body? Is it something that arises, abides and ceases? All of these things. Can you find it in any part of the body and so forth? So this is sort of the approach that we're going to be doing in a couple of meditations coming up in this weekend course. But also what we're going to be looking at now is a very methodical, systematic way of presenting this idea of emptiness, that all of these oral Mahamudra, all these oral instructions from the Mahamudra tradition are trying to lead us to. So all of these instructions are leading us to come to realise emptiness with respect to the mind. And so we're going to now look at what is that emptiness of the mind that all of these instructions are leading us to. Before we go there, is there any questions about anything there in those three examples? Okay, so let's go over to the next page then. And so now we're going to have, it says presentation having extracted the essence of those instructions. So what are the essence of all those instructions we just saw? What is this ultimate nature of the mind that they're all leading the meditator towards? So that's what we're now looking at here. And so this is really sort of a very classic presentation of emptiness, really coming down from Lama Tsongkhapa. So it begins by a quote. It says, as said in the sutra requested by Rastrapala, due to not knowing the way in which things are empty, peaceful and unproduced, migrators wander. The teacher, possessing compassion for them, caused them to enter by skillful methods and hundreds of reasonings. So let's have a look at the commentary on that quote from the Panchalama before we look at it in a bit more detail. The Panchalama comments on that. He says, thus it is taught that due to not knowing the profound emptiness, the way in which things are selflessness, migrators wander in samsara. the teacher who possesses great compassion for those who wander in samsara, in order to liberate them from samsara, cause them to enter the path of realizing selflessness directly and indirectly by skillful methods for realizing selflessness and hundreds of reasonings for determining selflessness. Okay, a few things here. First off, in the sutra quote, it says, "Due to not knowing the way in which things are empty, peaceful, and unproduced." Empty, peaceful, and unproduced. Here are what's called the 3 doors of liberation. And you often find this presentation in a presentation of emptiness. So the first word, things are empty. That is the door of liberation of emptiness. And then the second one is the door of liberation called signlessness, which is referring to peaceful. I'll explain that word in a minute. I'm just listing them for now. And the third door of liberation is called the door of liberation of wishlessness, and that's referring to this word unproduced. So these are all talking about emptiness from different perspectives. So the word emptiness is describing from the perspective of the thing itself. In terms of entity, meaning that everything is empty of inherent existence. But also, signlessness is looking at emptiness from the perspective of causes. Meaning, nothing is inherently, not only does nothing inherently exists, nothing is inherently produced. So the word signlessness means there's no sign of an inherently existent cause for this thing. And wishlessness is looking at emptiness from the perspective of result. That there are no inherently produced results. And that's what wishlessness means, to wish for some sort of result. So emptiness, signlessness, wishlessness are all talking about emptiness from different perspectives. Again, emptiness is talking about from the perspective of the thing itself. The thing is empty of inherent existence. The second one is saying that thing was not inherently produced. And the third one is saying this will not inherently produce some result. There will be no inherently produced result from that. So we can look at emptiness from any of those perspectives. As a beginner, these are not so easy, so we tend to focus here. And that's what we're going to be doing now. But you often see this presentation, 3 Doors of Liberation. And that's what it says, is that due to not knowing the way in which things are empty, peaceful and unproduced, migrators wander. I mean, essentially what it's saying is, due to not knowing that things are empty of inherent existence, migrators are stuck in samsara. They're all saying the same thing from those 3 perspectives.
Can you give another example to emphasize the ideas? It's a little bit...
Like for example, emptiness would be, let's say, using a plant. The plant does not inherently exist. This one is saying there is no inherently existent seed that produced that plant. This one is saying this plant will not produce an inherently existent fruit, for example.
Aren't these three things are actually a result of the idea that nothing has its own inherent existence?
Correct. They're all saying the same thing.
But not only all saying the same thing,
It's three perspectives.
They are all a logic result of a logic understanding that if there is nothing that exists from its own self, so nothing can produce and nothing can be produced by.
Excellent. Very good. And so what can be very helpful is that when we start to have a little understanding and experience of this, we can deepen that by looking at that. Exactly like you said, is that once we get to appreciate that thing's not really inherently existent, to deepen that and to really appreciate what that really means, we can go, well, oh, that means there's nothing producing it and it's not so we can go deeper. And we find that in the Heart Sutra. In the Heart Sutra, which is a classic condensed presentation of emptiness, we exactly see this thing. Is that first emptiness, and then they start looking at this in the Heart Sutra to deepen that understanding of emptiness.
How does that coincide with the laws of karma?
The laws of karma. There's no inherent existent karma. There's nothing that produces there's no inherently existent cause. There's no inherently existent result of karma.
So it negates karma?
No. This is the point here, and this is going to come up in the text a little bit later today, is, I'll give the brief answer now, but we're going to spend a lot of time on this because this is a very important point, is that actually emptiness means functioning world. Functioning world means emptiness. That's the real understanding of emptiness. Without emptiness, there cannot be a functioning world. And because there is a functioning world, it must be empty. That's the correct understanding. So therefore, karma can only exist because of emptiness. That's the correct understanding.
I think that one of the beautiful things when we come to study the Dharma is that sometimes the dualistic mind cannot conceptualize the absolute and the relative, and that's why it's so hard to talk about cause and result. There is no, when we say that cause and result there are, because the dualistic mind cannot understand it. But
Correct.
It's important to understand that what we do now is actually we look at the absolute right now.
And so we're going to be...
And then, of course, in the absolute there is the relative. But
that's all coming in the text.
Right, yeah.
That's all coming in the text. Yeah, very important point.
So do we really have like a personal karma, and can we control it in any way? Because we're...
Yeah, I mean, again, the short answer will come out more in the text is because things are empty, therefore things function. You know, often I hear people say who think they know about emptiness when they don't. I hear people say, "Oh, it doesn't matter because everything's empty." That's completely the wrong understanding. The real understanding is because things are empty, everything matters. So the short answer is, based on what we're saying here, is we need to be able to hold causality and emptiness in the same mind. Without emptiness, there is no causality, and causality means emptiness. That's the real understanding, but that's still to come in the text. So let's go a little bit further then. There's a quote here from Shantideva, of course, a great Indian Mahasiddha from the 8th century. All these branches were taught by the subduer for the sake of wisdom, meaning that all the other practices either directly or indirectly lead us to this wisdom of emptiness. And that's what he's saying here. And that's why, based on there, we said that cause them to enter the path of realizing selflessness or emptiness directly and indirectly by skillful methods. So we can approach emptiness directly or indirectly, and one of the indirect methods, of course, is we start with impermanence and no self, and go through that way. In fact, impermanence, which doesn't seem to get emphasized a lot in the Mahayana traditions, which I think is very unfortunate. If we can really internalize our understanding of impermanence and really start to have some taste of it, we're this close to realizing emptiness. I mean, we're so close. Because we often, when impermanence is presented, it's often presented as things changing moment by moment. Good? But then when that's explained, we often have this sort of idea that in the present moment there's a thing, a real thing, and in the next moment it becomes a different thing, and in the next moment it becomes a different thing. Is that impermanence? Impossible. Impossible. Because if there's a thing existing in the present moment, moment has time, has duration, that would mean there is something that for that short moment of time is not changing, which means it's not impermanent, which means why would it suddenly change? So this is impossible. Impermanence is really this. And if we really appreciate this, we're so close to realizing emptiness, so close. So impermanence is something that we all intellectually can get our head around. And if we really internalize that through Vipassana practice and start to have some taste of that, not only will we receive a lot of positive benefit in our life, but it'll provide us a very good basis for emptiness. Very good basis. Sure.
So let's say I completely realize that impermanence is that beautiful straight line.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean, is the way I understand it now, that I'm complete, since I'm empty, and everything, and emptiness is, it's not in here or in there, it's just this. Would that mean that anytime, anywhere, I'm ready for anything to come my way? And I accept anything that comes my way?
It would mean that, well, there's a lot more to unpack here, but I'll give a short answer. It would mean that whatever comes your way, it would be impossible for you to react with a mental affliction. And if there is suffering, coming your way, whether it's in this body or someone else's body, the natural, instinctive response is compassion. That's what will happen. Because on that compassion thing, and this is something that's going to come in the, not compassion directly, but through emptiness, is now there seems to be me here and them there. Suffering arises over there. Well, if it's my friends, well, maybe I'll help them. If I don't know them, nah, not my business. If it's someone I don't like, good. I hope they deserve it. And if it's here, oh no, I've got to fix that. And we react with a lot of fear, anxiety, and so forth. If we realise emptiness, so there's seems to be a boundary, me, them, boundary, distance, separation. Emptiness is about realising no boundary. So what you'll find is if you realise emptiness, not just intellectually understand, if you realise emptiness, and then suffering arises, whether it's in that body, or this body, equal. Compassion is the response.
I have a question about the previous subject.
Sure.
Why is peacefulness? does it
Peaceful
have to do
means
with-
pacified. The word peaceful can also be translated as pacify.